Hello everybody, this is Mr. Laubach. I hope you are doing well. In this video, we are going to quickly discuss the following items related to the end of the progressive era. What were some of the big achievements of the progressive movement? What were the shortcomings of the movement? How and why did the progressive era end? Now remember, the main objectives of the progressive movement were to address issues caused by industrialization, urbanization, immigration, and political corruption. Progressives could point to many achievements on all levels of government. A flood of legislation attempted to improve efficiency of government and improve conditions for the disadvantaged. Remember, the difference between the reform era and the progressive era was that the progressive era wanted the government to take action to create change, whereas in the reform era of earlier in the 1800s was more of a call for voluntary action. In the name of democracy, progressives attacked political machines like Boss Tweed in Tammany Hall, New York. They championed the 16th, 17th, and 18th Amendments, which were ultimately passed. We also saw the introduction of recall elections, referendums, initiatives, and women gaining suffrage with the 19th Amendment. All of this made our political system at least somewhat more democratic. In the spirit of trust busting, some antitrust laws like the Clayton Antitrust Act, the Interstate Commerce Commission, did take away some of the unrestricted power big business had. The unfettered laissez-faire capitalism, free market economy posture of the government during the Gilded Age did begin to become more restricted during the progressive era. Progressives were primarily interested in reforming urban areas, and they did little to address the problems of the rural poor, which we heard a lot about from the populist movement. Predominantly members of the middle class, most progressives were interested in aggressively pushing social equity in certain areas and not others, though. However, many progressives distrusted so-called new immigrants, so they did not receive as much attention as one would think. You can see here in this picture new immigrants at Ellis Island in New York City. You can't talk about the progressive era without talking about the Muckrakers. The Muckrakers were the journalists that exposed unethical practices in both the government and business and did lead to some big changes in laws in certain areas. Upton Sinclair's The Jungle led to the Pure Food and Drug Act and the Meat Inspection Act. Images from Jacob Riis's How the Other Half Lives really exposed the poor living conditions in many urban areas in the United States, especially in tenement housing, as you can see in this famous picture from Riis. There was not a big groundswell of progressives that wanted to assist African Americans in their search for equity. Teddy Roosevelt invited Booker T. Washington to a meal at the White House, but he received so much criticism from Southerners, he never did this again. This is a famous painting of Teddy Roosevelt and Booker T. Washington enjoying a meal together. Woodrow Wilson, a Democratic president, allowed members of his cabinet to resegregate the workers in the federal government. He also allowed the movie The Birth of a Nation to be played in the White House. This movie portrayed the KKK as the heroes of Reconstruction. However, in 1909, a group of African American and white reformers founded the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, also known as the NAACP, to combat racism and advocate for equality for all. W.E.B. Du Bois and Ida Wells were crucial founders of this organization. A high point of the progressive era was Teddy Roosevelt's domestic policy called the Square Deal. His three main goals with the Square Deal were conservation of natural resources, control of corporations, and consumer protection. These three demands are often referred to as the 3 C's of Roosevelt's Square Deal. Roosevelt famously said, "A square deal for every man, big or small, rich or poor." The idea of the Square Deal was that everybody should be treated fairly by the government and society. So what led to the end of the progressive era? Despite President Wilson running for president promising to keep the U.S. out of war, American intervention in World War I marked the beginning of the end of the progressive era. Supporters of reforms such as women's suffrage and prohibition did achieve their big goals, and most people's attention now turned towards the war effort. In conclusion, a hotly debated question throughout history was, and still remains, overall, were the effects of the progressive era more harmful or beneficial to American society?